Welcome to the Week in Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, presented to you by Cooper Tires. Also, my co-pilot, Graham Goodwin, he of DailySportsCars.com. Also presented by the Justice Brothers, makers of fine additives, cleaners, and lubricants for the automotive, heavy equipment, agricultural, and industrial worlds. How are things in your world?
It's cold and it's dark, Marshall, but it's not going to be that for long for me, because I am, as we speak, looking at a pile of stuff that I've got to cram into an unfeasibly small bag to climb again onto a long-haul flight, this time for the AsLMS season closer at Sepang this weekend in the fabulous country of Malaysia.
Ooh, I would say I'm jealous, but knowing that I believe my month of March could be 4 straight weekends of travel, I'm going to enjoy being home for another weekend or two before things get busy. My friend, as always, we have wonderful questions and a rather impressive number of questions from our dear listeners across Facebook, across Twitter, and also the Reddit community. As we do on this show, compared to our brand new Inside the Sports Car Paddock, which is strictly interviews, everything we do here on the Week in Sports Cars, if you happen to be a first-time listener, is about you, the listener, and your questions. So you drive the show, you drive the conversations. We cover IMSA. That tends to be my little world of what I'm into full-time. Graham, a long-time, upstanding member of the European sports car reporting community. You might hear his voice on a variety of broadcasts, whether it's Asian Le Mans Series, European Le Mans Series. It's been heard for many years on the WEC. We get into SRO. We get into all kinds of nonsense too. With all that said, Graham, since you are the man who officially picks where we start each week, which category, where should we go first?
Let's go IMSA. We started with AsLMS last week, WC, Asian Le Mans Series and ACO. Let's go with IMSA this week, MP, and I'm going to start serving questions your way, like a frenzied doubles partner. And we're going to go with Mike Sargent Racing, who's a member of the USCR Reddit group. He's asking, do you think there would be more manufacturer interest in GTLM and GTE if GTLM had a Pro-Am counterpart in the IMSA series? Particularly right now, that's quite an interesting question, isn't it?
I absolutely do, Mike. I believe that there would be more interest, and that's based solely on the fact that if we look at the WEC's model, I apologize, still dealing with sinus something or other, so plural, singular, sometimes my face, nose, and mouth isn't complying here. I do believe so, Mike. If we look at the WEC, what they have with their GTE Pro and GTE AM categories, we do know that GTE AM is a very popular thing, and while I'm not sure that we would lose a significant number of entries from IMSA's Pro-Am GT Daytona class if they were to add a Pro-Am GTLM category, I do think that there would be some takers. We also know that our good pal Ben Keating, who is just on Inside the Sports Car Paddock this week, along with his entrant and or team runner Bill Riley, they have the absolute potential next year to be the very first, call it de facto Pro-Am team running a GTE/GTLM car in IMSA or the WEC if they want, because they happen to own. Ben has purchased, not leased, but purchased one of the, I believe it's 7 or 8 Ford GTs that have been built for competition. So the team confirmed that they have purchased chassis number 4, Graham, and that one, I believe, has some pretty interesting provenance. Obviously, when the program was launched and the Blue Oval came back to international-based factory sports car racing in 2016, I think the highlight from the year was their victory at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in June in the GTE Pro class. If we're just talking among the small stable of cars built by Multimatic for IMSA and the WEC, the chassis number 4 that Ben has purchased is actually the one, according to the Ford Chip Ganassi team, that won the very first race for them, that being at Monterey, what we call today WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca. So that took place in May, obviously with the number 67 car driven by Richard Westbrook and Ryan Briscoe, a super fuel economy run for the ages. So that was the actual first win for Ford back with this GT. Then they, in June, won Le Mans with the 66 entry. And then this number 67 went on to win in IMSA the next 2 rounds, both at Watkins Glen and at Mosport, a.k.a. Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. So this chassis that Ben has picked up, Graham, that could indeed be a participant next year. I think I'd be surprised if it wasn't competing in at least 1 or 2 GTLM races in IMSA. It has some fine provenance of winning the first 3 races for Ford in IMSA upon their return.
Wowza. I mean, that is a car with some history. Here's another little prospect for you, by the way, something we dug out of a throwaway sentence in a press release on Daily Sports Car, and race of that for that matter this week, which comes the way of Project One Racing. They are championship leaders at the moment in the GTM category of the WEC. They were emerged as a full season entrant for the coming European Le Mans Series. Why is that significant in terms of the question we've just been asked here? Well, because the other little snippet is they've bought a second Porsche 911 RSR. They are committing to next season in the FIWC. I think they are the 5th team to formally commit, or the 5th car to formally commit for the 2019-20 season. Of course, there's a while yet till teams have to. But the reason I add that into this discussion, MP, is because their full season driver in the WEC is Patrick Lindsay. From Park Place Motorsport, and I do sort of wonder whether or not Patrick, and I'll be catching up with him at Sebring, whether or not he's got the taste for maybe some full season RSR competition stateside as well. So if that did emerge as a possibility, and with the direction that things seem to be going with GT-LM and GTE Pro, I think there's every possibility they might at least have a sniff around that. There could be something there, couldn't there?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what Patrick did with the Project One folks last year, I mean, that was really the primary focus for him. So happy to, well, I think that it's just branching out into an area that, I mean, granted, if we wind the clock back, Graham, these things weren't even discussions because you bought the best thing available or you made it and then you raced it. So just with the way things have evolved in modern times, you have most manufacturers who will not make their full factory GTE/GTLM cars available for sale, etc., etc. I'm not saying there haven't been a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, a big, big rarity. So whether it's a Ben Keating, a Patrick Lindsay, or others, if you can't afford to get yourself into a Ford GT, a 911 RSR, or something else really cool, I hope that we can see more of it, just because as much as I love seeing these factories try and beat up one another, what's at least my favorite part, it's when you have a team like Risi Competizione, whose involvement and support from Ferrari has fluctuated throughout the years, has come down to a point where we only expect to see them once or twice a year maybe, and by and large coming out of Mr. Risi's pocket. But I love seeing these great spoilers, especially in and among the factories. It's the same thing in IMSA's DPI category, Graham, where the now we have with our pal Jeff Brown, with the Core Autosport Nissan On-Road DPI. That's a fully independent team with a full kind of factory-grade DPI trying to upset all the big, Fortune 100 companies trying to do battle. So that's just my spirit, man. Give me a chance for some of the smaller folks to go in and play with the big guys and hopefully beat them up from time to time. That makes MP happy.
It's just like pulling on that deerstalker hat and the check shirt and going out big game hunting, isn't it? Love it to pieces. By the way, it's a cracking little video done by Pichello Lubricants with Giuseppe Risi that I spotted on Facebook in the last couple of days. You don't often see Giuseppe interviewed, and it was great to hear his words about how that journey all started. Let's move on from Brock Sampson, another one from the USCR Reddit group. Thanks, guys, for being supporters of this Week in Sports Cars podcast. He asked whether or not this has been discussed in the past. I don't think it has, but could the IMSA LMP2 grid be boosted by reassigning one or both of IMSA's Auto Le Mans entries to the P2 class champion in either the full season or even just the NAEC championship? Or would IMSA still be too expensive for an entrant over the ALMS or the Asian Le Mans series to be worth entering just for that reward? It sort of is, isn't it?
I believe so, at least with the way my mind works. Something we have established many, many eons ago is a rather flawed thing. Yes, it's just bad. Auto entries are great. Doesn't mean that those are free entries. It doesn't mean that the trip to compete at Le Mans is free. Just means the door's opened, where others are maybe having to knock and hopefully have someone answer. I just think of, look, if you want to go to Le Mans and compete, since we're talking about P2, if you're wanting to do that as a team, then yes, I would think that this dynamic that you mentioned might be a smarter pathway. If you are a driver or someone, part of a small collective, you and your pro driver, or you're the pro and you want to bring your AM with you, we just see also that P2 each year at Le Mans, Graham, by and large, is a who bought what dynamic. And the vast majority of the teams that are running are making one seat, if not two or three, available for hire. There are some, obviously, that are rolling into Le Mans, either having, in the old seasonal format, kicked off with their lineup that they're hoping to win the championship with. Therefore, that lineup will remain the same for Le Mans. Or in this case, now we're coming to the conclusion of the super season at Le Mans. So, again, those teams vying for a P2 title would not want to alter that chemistry, but for many, many others who aren't in that fight, go buy it, go rent it, go do something. And so just looking at this pathway, possibly, I would say that, to me, do I spend $2.1 million hoping to get that auto invite by doing a full season? Or is it cheaper for me to just say, hey, what can I rent? Is there another car you might enter on our behalf altogether, and see if that would get in? So since neither one's a guarantee, usually, obviously if you're trying to win the auto invite by winning the P2 title in this dynamic, again, there's no guarantee either way. So an interesting situation, but one that's just usually, Graham, been circumvented by folks saying, hey, I have money, I have a desire, who's got a car?
Well, there's the flip side, isn't there? Because this year, with the decision by Misha Goikberg not to take up the opportunity offered, I think that makes Misha part of a very small club indeed of people who said, yeah, you know what, no thanks, twice. And he's earned that opportunity to take up an automatic entry through IMSA competition. But on two occasions in the last 3 years, if I'm right, he's opted not to take it up. Ben Keating, by contrast, of course, has taken up that opportunity every single time and has actually been every single time in a different car. And one of the things that's actually added interest to the lower orders, if you like, the Pro-Am orders in the Le Mans 24-hour entry. Twitter question this time at Andy Midnight. Andrew Minot.
You made up a word, I think.
I did.
Did this just happen? I'm the guy who makes up nonsensical words each week. We do need an update. We haven't seen an update of my silly word manufacturing, but I think
we're on to Volume 2, mate.
Well,
Volume 2.
Well, we might have our first Graham Goodwin.
Oh, dear me. I can't get a reputation like that. Surely not. There we go. So Andrew asks, is there a discussion underway in North American motorsports on introducing hybrid drive cars anytime soon? Climate change a real thing? It does seem like a tech that would benefit from more racing pushing development. Hypercar, LMP1H, F1 are the only hybrid series and classes that he can think of. North American racing, hybridization, electrification. What's going on, MP?
NASCAR lays the trail. Actually, it's just electric cigarette lighters, I believe, is what they're going to have in the cockpit. Andrew, part of the discussion that I know we've written about this for probably a year or two. It hasn't been super frequent, though, so can easily understand why it might not be a frontline topic. But IMSA, as part of their next generation DPI regulations, they've been fairly forthright in saying that some sort of hybridization, some sort of electrification is probably going to be a component there. In speaking with IMSA President Scott Atherton, might have even been as long as a year ago, Andrew, asked him for an update on this. Just, again, formal, informal talks with manufacturers. They have their working group meetings. They had one recently at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Just asked him for an update, not necessarily on where this topic was headed with adding some form of hybrid, most likely spec hybrid, to the next generation DPIs. It was more a case of how is this conversation being shaped as time goes on. And he said it's really interesting because when we first began these sit-downs and said, hey, future, what should we do? Should we have hybrid? Should we not? He said we had more folks, more naysayers among the manufacturers in the room than those who supported it. And over time, that has changed. And with subsequent meetings, it seems like more manufacturers are getting on board with the idea that we do need to have something. And again, I apologize, I'm forgetting the exact reference, Andrew, but he did mention that he took a call from one manufacturer who said, hey, our CEO is really interested in these DPI conversations, and the thing that perked them up, the thing that has drawn them in closer, maybe compared to an earlier point where they were, meh, all right, sure, we'll sit and talk, but meh. The thing that's really hooked them is hearing that there's a possibility of having some sort of electrification, some sort of hybrid angle, because that is where the internal marketing message continues to move. So I realize it's only citing one unnamed manufacturer, but I do like the premise that, having gone from costs, it's going to be too much, things are going to be too crazy, run away, to, okay, more manufacturers are seeing that creating or participating in sports car series here in the U.S. in the next couple of years, that sets a forward-looking set of rules, Graham, that leaves hybridization, electrification out. Yeah, I think that is just something where, it's going to be perceived as is this a vintage racing series that you're holding? What, is this old timers thing? What's going on here? So I think IMSA is going to be the first to broach that subject with a major top line sports car rule set in North America. I have been fairly persistent, if we're just talking North America here, in suggesting to IndyCar that, look, I love where you're going with your next generation engine rules, fast and loud, and 900, 1,000 horsepower, that's great. But as long as you leave the hybrid angle completely unavailable to manufacturers for them to consider, I think you're actually doing more harm than good for yourselves.
I think you're right, MP. Yeah, I think you're right.
That's what brands are looking for, whether it's real or not, whether it's just a marketing ploy or not. I mean, Formula E, by and large, is not something that anyone really needs, but I'll tell you, the brands investing money in that and more who are trying to get in, they are, when you have so many manufacturers investing in something that I think most people go, granted, last weekend's Mexico City finale was the last lap, last crossing the finish line. That was amazing. But by and large, most people aren't raving about Formula E competition. So when you have something that isn't super popular, yet has so many manufacturers investing in it, it tells you that money's being spent where value is found, and if you're closing the door to that value, you're closing the door to money. And so I think IMSA is going to be first. I hope IndyCar follows. It sounds crazy to say this, but if NASCAR wants to be around for generations to come, they're probably going to have a day of reckoning here too, where they realize, oh, the Fords, Chevys, and Toyotas that those badges on the cars and those manufacturers who spend a ton to be involved in NASCAR racing, Graham, even there, I'm sure there's going to come a point in time where they say, hey, give us something. I don't care what it is. Maybe we enter pit lane and leave pit lane completely silent on an electric motor. I don't know what it is, but give us something so we can at least say we're a part of this club.
I completely agree. And you know, for those listening to this podcast from the UK, you'll be as painfully aware as I am that the big news story in the UK today is about the proposed closure of a Honda plant here. And that is absolutely down to this move towards electrification. It makes 160,000 Honda Civics for across the EU. And whilst a lot of the pre-publicity was about Brexit, the reality is this is about electrification. Got to get on board with it. You know, the reality is that we do have, as you quite rightly say, LMP1H, hypercar looking towards that route. F1 has been with that route for some time as well. And you're spot on, MP. If you're not considering it, you're going to be left behind. It is no longer, I'm afraid, has been, you know, something of internet fodder lately and irrelevance. It's frankly more and more relevant every single day. Moving on. Our good friend Nick Devon, you know what? I always muff it. Go on. You're very good at this one.
Yeah, I love it. I feel vindicated for once. I'm usually
Dovniak.
the mumbling, fumbling Dovbiniak. Yes,
Dovbiniak. Yes. Right. He's asking, can you guys explain why the Dallara LMP2 does not seem to have the pace of the Orica, but does quite well as a Cadillac DPI? Is it a case of the letters that shall not be named, that is POB, opposite way round?
Peanuts or does butter, I believe. It's a bizarre sandwich. Yes.
Indeed. Or does IMSA allow further development of the car? There you go. You want to kick off with this one? I'll give you what I know about the P2 car.
Sure, and this is also our final IMSA question. This might be the lowest volume of, and this isn't a bad thing. It's great.
Crisis.
Yes, actually, we're going to have a
DPI failure confirmed.
A panic meeting after this. How to get more IMSA questions. Normally, it dominates each show, so it's actually quite nice to have a change of pace. So, Nick, a couple things here. We have not seen a Dallara LMP2 compete in IMSA, so it's hard for me to make any comparisons there. We have obviously seen that chassis compete in Europe, which Graham will speak to in just a moment. I would say it's a numbers thing, like usual. If you have 3, 4, 5, however many Oreca 07s, or although it has not been particularly competitive, there's still been a decent number of Ligier JSP217s. Numerically, if you've got 3, 4, 5 of those things running around either in one series or at least across the globe, just the basics of you're going to be gathering more data, you're going to be finding strong points, weaknesses, things that with the LMP2 rules could then be thrown into a highly effective joker package to develop the car aerodynamically, mechanically, or otherwise for an upcoming season. I don't know if there's been enough of that real hardcore running with multiple, let's just call them bigger, better, badder teams to be able to get the Dallara to that point. As in terms of the Cadillac DPI version of it, I mean, look, you can see that with greater freedom in aerodynamics, also the not just the motor difference, but also the packaging differences. Look at all the things that can be done in IMSA, taking these base WEC P2s, and here's a new word I'm making up intentionally, modificating them, however you darn well please. You have something where, I mean, and this is not trying to speak ill of our friends at Riley and Multimatic, but one of the doggiest of dogs of LMP2s happens to be that Riley Multimatic Mark 30 chassis. It just was relatively useless on all fronts. Applied and filtered through the Mazda prism with a significant amount of money spent on air development, mechanical development, chassis, packaging, etc. Boy, a car that could not get out of its way in stock P2 form is now in 2019 something that, might be the class of the field. We'll see on outright
record
pace.
Breaker. A record breaker.
So, again, to your point, Nick, something that, I think if there were more Dalaras on the grid and also running here in the U.S., frankly, that could help develop it into a better stock position with better updates, I'm sure it could be far more competitive than it has been. Also, we probably, Graham, before you fill in the European angle with a Dalara, we also need to say that we always expected with the ACO and the WC nominating 4 strict, only just them P2 manufacturers for this recent formula that kicked in 2017. It was always going to be a case where one was going to rise to the top. There might be a number 2 that was close, but I don't think anybody with racing experience expected, we're going to have 4 equal choices. Pick whatever you want. They're going to be so close. The rules are written in such a way. How could they not be almost identical? In reality, the Eureka 07 class of the field, period. Anybody getting into LMP2 anywhere, if you aren't doing it in an Eureka 07, you're kidding yourself. And that's just what the facts have proven to be. This next iteration, who knows? It could be, we don't know who they're going to select as manufacturers, Graham, but whatever that thing is, there is going to be a chassis that stands out. Just this is a case where before this era ends, actually I'm probably going to feel a little bit sad and feeling like I don't know if we really saw how good the Dalara could be in straight WEC P2 form, because it doesn't feel like it was ever developed all the way there.
Well, I mean, it certainly has suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune as we come into this year. As things stand, there will be 3 active cars in 2019. One to finish the WEC current super season with the Racing Team Netherlands squad. I do not expect that team to complete the complete the year rather than the season with that car. We've then got a car that's confirmed for the full season in the European Le Mans Series. That is going to be with Carlin Motorsport. That's the XSMP Racing chassis from last year. And then we've got a car that we'll see at Monza, the European Le Mans Series, but then will graduate to the FIWEC, and that is the Cetelar Racing, the Scuderia Valorba Corsa car, the all-Italian squad. So we will still see a Dalara in the WEC in 2019-2020. As to what's gone wrong, well, it is a car that, frankly, they got something wrong in the initial design of the aerodynamic package for that car. Suffered massive porpoising at high speeds. That was supposed to have been sorted with the round of Joker amendments that were made to all bar the Orica in the beginning of last year. There was an attempt for a further minor amendment to be made to deal with a still prevalent fault there. But the bigger issue, I think, for them is that they've just lost customers. Customers have lost a little bit of confidence, been unlucky with a couple of those customers. But it does seem to be at the moment the third of 3, as the Ligier seems to strike a bit of a sweet spot on the Michelin rubber. Dalara has just not found that pace. And what, unfortunately for Dalara, you've now got teams crossing over to other chassis and finding that the same people on the same track with the same team are quicker. There's no arguing with that. What are we heading for in the future with that Dalara? Will they actually bid to be a part of it? I'm sure they will, because they've got a very good customer base in the in IMSA with that chassis as the basis for DPI. Who will be the next licensees for or license holders, if you like, for LMP2? We may see a bit of a shift and a surprise there. But yeah, I think we're heading to a position where I cannot see there being a dramatic shift in terms of where those regulations are. That's going to be around performance levels against the next top class cars, which at the moment are supposed to be the car hypercars. That's what will define the future performance parameters for the LMP2 cars. And that, by the way, Marshall, allows the rule makers to kill two birds with one stone and not make terribly many changes without making a massive shift in the regulations. For something which does seem to work commercially, they can introduce some mild balance of performance and peg back some of the performance overall for the class and then manage the relative performance between the various chassis. Not what people want to see, not what people want to hear, but my guess is, whilst others may predict something rather more radical for a future LMP2, I can't see that when you've got the number of cars out there in still what is a relatively new Pro-Am formula. I can't see them actually messing with it too much.
I think we're also learning that Graham's hungry. You've mentioned killing two birds. You've mentioned putting on your cap and going hunting so far. It must be dinner time at the Goodwin Manor. So
it's always dinner time in the Goodwin Manor, particularly if I sneak in the kitchen and Trudy's not there. But no, I've actually got my beady eyes looking up the garden. I'm in the office at the bottom of the garden. No, it really isn't a shed. Looking up into the kitchen, and at the moment the kitchen is bare. I think the girls are actually out somewhere. But it's an interesting debate to come. With the next round of regulations for LMP2, which is due in a couple of years' time. Nothing to get excited about quite yet, but I think we might start to hear and see from those that are interested in being part of that club, because certainly get the formula right, and as Orica and to a lesser degree Ligier have shown, you can sell cars.
And we can also say farewell to our IMSA category. Very early, and again, I'm liking that we are motoring on and getting into the affectionately titled WEC AsLMS ACO, also known as WEC, AsLMS Series and ACO, your bailiwick, as my father would have said. And so I'm going to kick off here with a question via Reddit from Andersaws, who says, having read your thoughts on the potential of a GTE Pro to fall victim to lower car counts in the future, I'm wondering why that would be the case. Is it simply massive costs that would preclude any manufacturers that want to follow Porsche's run of both prototype and GTE at the same time? Would BMW Ford's potential move to DPI or hypercar automatically mean that the GTE Pro programs would go away? What kept Porsche from doing the same, Graham Goodwin?
Well, you've missed out one thing, which is the impact that the hypercar programs, if that comes to fruition in the way in which it's predicted that it should, according to the rule makers. If you think about some of the organisations that have been mentioned there, whether or not that's Aston Martin with or without Red Bull, whether it's Red Bull with or without Aston Martin, whether it's Ferrari, whether it's Porsche, whether it's McLaren, whoever else might be involved in that, then of course you start to see a not dissimilar list than currently exists in GTE Pro. Will those factory teams be in a position to be able to support what will inevitably be a more expensive prototype program alongside a factory GTE Pro program? The answer is no, they won't. So you've then got to look at what might come next if that plan comes together. BMW is a slightly different kettle of sea creatures. The BMW position at the moment, I think, is predicated on a couple of things. I don't think they're getting remotely close to the bang for the buck they hoped for from their GTE Pro and GTLM programs. The missing piece, I think I said on last week's show, MP, and the question that's not yet been asked of Jens Marker, or if it has been, I've not seen the answer to it. He has been asked, and asked repeatedly, whether or not the WC program for GTE Pro is under review. What he's not been asked is whether or not the GTLM program for IMSA is under review. And the inevitability is, if they're heading down the direction of a either partially customer DPI program or indeed an entirely customer DPI program, the inevitability is that it's likely that that would be under review as well. I think the issue for BMW is about the class. I think it's about the way in which their offering in that class has emerged and is perceived. And it's a difficult one, this one. I did have a conversation with a colleague that says, you do wonder, don't you, whether or not all those really funny internet offerings showing their M8 GTE being utterly massive have actually helped to kill that program? There's a question for you.
Yeah, I think there might be something to that, and I don't want to place too fine of a point there. I don't want to. It would be ridiculous to suggest that internet memes have caused a big reaction by BMW's board of directors. But I would say that knowing how in so many cases today there's a hyper overreaction to the smallest things like that, instead of it being, oh my goodness, everyone look at this, we're being ridiculed, we must run away, and making it a huge internal thing, it could be as simple as a sensitivity of one board member, two board members just thinking, oh, well, we're spending this much and people are making fun of it? Again, it doesn't have to be this big internal discussion matter. It could just be something that among a few people who were voting on, yes, do we commit, 10 plus million annually, if not more, to this thing or not? It could just be something that sways the heart of one or two or enough board members to say, oh, well, yeah, that's no fun. Where I know that we'll cover a bit of ground that we did a few weeks ago here, but I think the topic warrants it. If we're talking about BMW specifically, we know that this is a real thing. We mentioned of all the manufacturers that could embark on DPI programs, knowing that hypercar is still a little bit too early in its rule cycle for many, if any, big manufacturers. Oh yeah, we're super on board. It's something that we're waiting for the larger numbers to either say yay or nay. DPI is a lot easier, and I think far more cost effective. With BMW, it would not surprise me at all to see them, I don't know if I want to say make a decision to enter DPI, Graham, but as we said, pretty much any manufacturer involved with production of vehicles could very likely choose to be in IMSA's DPI category. I think all of us, every racing sports car related outlet has written something saying, here's 5 or 10 individually that have expressed an interest or gone part way towards something. We know that interest is high. We know that BMW has been looking at evaluating since DPI came alive in 2017. I would not be surprised to see them continue to take a more concerted look at this. If it were to happen, I would say timeline-wise, 2020 would be very hard. They would have to be working on something right now, this minute, and they have yet, to our knowledge, even had a formal sit-down on whether the GT program will or will not go away. So I think if we were to see BMW decide to return to prototypes, it would certainly be make more sense along a 2021 timeline, maybe 22. We have seen gaps in the past here, at least in the U.S., where they have stopped racing one model and taken a little bit to come back with something else. So that's that. On the Ford end, we've been saying for a while now, and we'll continue to say, it's coming, it's happening. There's a DPI that we're all looking forward to seeing very soon, made by Multimatic, manufacturers of the Ford GT. So we do know that one is happening. We'll have to see if they're joined by another GTLM pal in this evolution of what's taking place, at least here in the States. All right, we got a ton of other great questions, so I'm going to throw many of them at you. I'm going to jump around here just for a little bit of fun. Some guy named Guy Cosmo, not exactly sure.
Guy Cosmo.
Guy Cosmo. Okay, not sure if he is...
Never heard of him.
Brother of Kramer, possibly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Comes in from Twitter. Are you excited to see the showdown in the Asian Le Mans Series LMP2 AM class this weekend? And do you have a favorite, all caps, for the win? Hint, hint. All I can say is that the number 23 car is ready to, all caps, bring it! Exclamation point. Again, I think this guy might be cheering for a relative or something.
Yeah.
Not totally sure. But, yeah, what are you thinking there? And give this poor guy something to latch on to. It sounds like he's a little lonely.
I'm 100% absolutely sure. And welcome to the Weekend Sportscast, Guy Cosmo.
Yes, our pal Guy. We love Guy.
I'm very excited for the weekend, and I'm absolutely excited for the LMP2 AM contest. 3 cars going to be involved in LMP2 AM. Remember, we're going to be watching at Sepang this weekend the LMP2 class and its AM subclass with the previous iteration of LMP2 cars with the Nissan and Judd V8s. And yep, Guy with his teammates Patrick Byrne, Guy and Patrick Byrne returning champions from LMP3, of course, for the AsLMS series, and joined in that United Autosports car by Sally Yoluk, looking to overturn a sizable points gap to the ARC Bratislava Ligier, but 4 auto entries up for grabs this weekend. 1 for the overall champions, 1 for the LMP2 AM champions, 1 for the LMP3 champions, and the GT winners. And yes, United Autosports, still in the hunt for 3 of those titles. The Byrne, Cosmo, Yoluk combo very much part of the excitement we're going to see with it'd be 20 plus cars. We've had a bit of recovery in numbers. 3 more cars announced in the last week or so to join the grid for this one in what appears to be a pretty good time for the AsLMS series, beginning to find a little bit of traction. I know they've had a pretty high power group down in Australia talking to the guys at the Bend, where we'll be going with the championship in mid-January 2020. Looking forward to that one in 47 degree heat. But the numbers on the up for this year, I think will be on the up again for next year. I'm hearing some quite encouraging stuff from some of the LMP2 teams, with the Gibson engine cars joining in for the top class. These current cars, the older cars, will stay for LMP2 AM. Guy, good luck. The numbers at the moment are against you. The competition has been pretty fierce. We've found emerging talents aplenty in these LMP2 and the LMP3 cars over the last couple of years. It's been a delight to see Guy and Patrick attacking this series. They'll be there, by the way, with the Sky TV crew, with the redoubtable Andrew Marriott. Looking forward to seeing Andrew in Sepang this weekend. And they will be producing a show about their kind of battles for the end of this season, which United Autosports will be featured prominently in. So I expect that anybody who's got access to that either on their terrestrial TV, cable TV, or online at some point, I'm sure Andrew Marriott will help us to understand when it'll be coming through. So a little bit of extra opportunity in addition to the growing legions of people who are following what we do online, and a simply massive number of people following the AsLMS series across China. Massive audience in China for the AsLMS series. Then you know what, Guy, you're famous in China, mate.
He is. I think much like when the all-time great trumpet player and band leader Miles Davis went to Europe, Paris in particular, and found love for his art and craft that was not so forthcoming in North America. I think what we just recommended, time to move to China. Because clearly that's where you've got a lot of fun and revelry to be had. So I don't know what we call this, Graham, but we, on occasion, while recording this show, have fun press releases that land. And maybe they're cool press releases, and they're things you're like, wow, that's very topical. Timing was almost as if they knew we were recording. And then there are some, this might just fall in the, I think I'm going to punch myself in the face because someone thought this needed to be written and distributed press release category, hashtag whatever the acronym might be. And this isn't sports cars, but I just have to read it to you because, I mean, this is a phenomenal thing. Headline, news, all caps, Rococo Steak, named a new partner of Firestone Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. And the subhead, Rococo Steak named a new partner. Restaurant will also serve as the site of Event Credential Center. So,
wow.
Yes.
Stop everything, everybody. Stop everything.
So, most restaurants that I know of don't open early. they often open late, and the people are really grumpy because they were up all night drinking. So the thought of them being open at 7 a.m. to get credentials for the opening IndyCar race of the year, I just love everything about that. And just from a branding standpoint, Graham, and I realize that I'm describing images on radio, which is always a cardinal sin, but Rococo, with the logo they have, it's ROCO, and the C, the last C, is actually flipped backwards.
Right.
And then an O. So
they're making up new words.
Yes, Rococo steak. There's some cocoa right there. All right, my friend. So that was the press release that landed in the middle of the show that makes me want to punch myself in the face.
That should become a new feature, shouldn't it? Press releases we've received today that make us want to punch ourselves in the face. It's not that snappy, but it's got a theme.
Well, and it will probably just be contracted to Marshall, please just punch yourself in the face, and it won't have any attachment to press releases or otherwise. So we just mentioned auto invites. Invites to Le Mans seem to be maybe the emerging theme of this week's show, Graham, brought to us by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. So let's stay there with Reddit_worst_night. Believe it or not, this comes in via Reddit. Following on from discussion last week about auto invites, should there be a limit on how many Le Mans 24 auto invites a team can have? Should full season WEC entries get put in after auto invites in such a way that if the car already has an entry from the auto invite, they don't get another as being part of the WEC? Interesting.
Okay, it's an interesting question. It has been a point of debate at the moment. We are expecting a maximum of 15 to be put out there. We know of the initial 11 that 8 have been taken up because they were part of the 42. The 3 that weren't were the Toyota team, of course, because they have the 2 cars they want through WEC and their effective auto entries there. Porsche did not take up the auto entry for winning GTE Pro last year, although rather oddly did put out what may have been a lost in translation tweet this week that said they would have 4 GTE Pro cars at the Le Mans 24 Hours. That's not yet been announced, and we have spoke to Porsche about that. They confirmed not lost in translation, but they're not saying anything different to last year. And the Signatech Alpine team, who won LMP2, if you remember, after the disqualification of the G-Drive team, have opted not to enter a second car in addition to their full-season WEC car. So 8 of the 11 have already been taken up and are on that list of 42. We have the 4 we talked about just a moment ago that will come our way at the end of this coming weekend in Sepang, and we'll get the remaining 18 cars, which will include those 4, if those teams decide to take them up, and I believe they all will, that we will hear about on the 1st of March. So that's the kind of excitement left to come. As for whether or not you place a lid on those numbers, there have been a couple of occasions in recent years where that's been a thing. You'll find all sorts of ways around it, renaming the team. So you've got 2 cars per team, but it's not quite the same name for the team. Have a quick look about the way that's been handled in the past, for instance, with the Dempsey Proton Racing, Proton Competition, Proton Racing type stuff. We had the controversy of Jackie Chan DC Racing a couple of seasons ago, where they did earn an additional pair. In fact, I think they earned an additional 3 potential auto entries. We were not expecting those to be taken up. And in fact, I was briefed by a very senior member of staff indeed at the ACO that those additional entries would not be taken up. And then come the entry list, and the regular 2 Oricas from Jackie Chan DC Racing are joined by 2 Ligiers, which turned out to be effectively being fielded by the Ligier factory and Oak Racing, their nascent in-house team. That ultimately did not go down well, I think, on a whole range of fronts. It suited the purpose to actually balance the numbers between the various chassis in LMP2, but it certainly basically turned out to be a purely commercial affair for Ligier. I think a lesson was learned there. I'm guessing, therefore, that what we're pointing towards here are questions around the Proton Racing thing. I look at it this simply. there are always rules, and there is always a proviso at the end of that rule list which says this is an invitation race, and we'll do what we damn well please, effectively. That is the literal French translation from French into English. They will decide who they want on the grid for their race, with the proviso that if you've effectively ticked all of the boxes for a WEC entry, you'll definitely be in. But in the case of Proton competition and Dempsey Proton, putting aside for just one moment the shenanigans about the timing of their fuel stops, the reality is that they earned 2 places through success on track. And I've had a number of conversations with a number of teams about this, and even the ones that are massively irritated that they're not yet in a position to be able to say to their stakeholders, we're definitely going to Le Mans. The vast majority of those people have turned around to me and said, well, the lesson to us next year is we've got to go out and win it, haven't we? And I think there is an element there. For me, I think there shouldn't be a hard cap. I think that discourages people from coming forward and making grand efforts on a number of fronts. If you've got the customers, if you've got the wherewithal, if you've got the cars, if you've got that opportunity, I frankly see no reason at all why you shouldn't have a number of cars. Otherwise, what do we do about AF Corsa with the various named teams under their awnings around the world? For me, I think it just has to get to the stage where what you've got at the Le Mans 24 Hours is a viable, promotable, frankly, world gathering of the very best you can in all 4 of those racing categories. And if that means from time to time that a team of high standing doesn't go, or if that means from time to time that another team of high standing gets an additional car through their own success on the racetrack, 9 times out of 10, I'm perfectly happy that actually somebody has got the interest of the great race at heart. They don't always get it right. There's normally at least a couple of cars in a couple of classes where there's some form of debate. But the reality is, for the most part, I will say this, that our friends at the ACO have been excellent custodians of what is the world's greatest endurance race.
And I love the fact that we have another brand new addition to the Weekend Sports Cars, Graham Goodwin's French translations. They're awesome. Hey. I'm going to ask you to do more of these going forward, because, I took 3 years of French in high school, which means that with the time that's passed, I remember about a week and a half of it. But I swear what you just translated, I don't know if I've read the same thing, but regardless.
Telling you.
We're adding new features next week. Tell us what you want Graham to translate from French. Oh, this is pretty darn awesome.
That could go very badly wrong very, very quickly.
Courtesy of our pal Effective Sprinkles. And yet again, we are going to, at some point in time, have a week where we just ask you to explain not just what your screen name means, but the rationale behind it. Some of these are just amazing.
It's obvious that it's either to do with some kind of cake garnish, or it's something that he's been berated by his partner for his bathroom abilities. One or the other.
I was just thinking this person's a fan of water that falls from the sky exactly where it's needed. Therefore it's more effective. But my name is pretty simple. It's just at Marshall Pruitt, but that's the name that I created as part of the Witness Relocation Program.
Absolutely.
So there you go. Effective Sprinkles, another Reddit questionnaire, has something for us on LMP1 tires for 2019 and 2020, asking, is there any more news about the LMP1 tire situation? Will there be bespoke tires for LMP1 non-hybrid in this upcoming, the soon-to-be next super season? And says that there was talk of another test and Dragon Speed skipping it for some bizarre reason. I'm wondering if there's anything connected there.
Putting aside the Dragon Speed thing, because I think that to a degree is a bit of a kind of Trojan horse on this one. The answer is that yes, there was, if you recall, supposed to be a one-off tyre testing session at Shanghai. I want to say it was it Shanghai or was it Fuji? Either way, it didn't happen because it threw it down with rain. So this was supposed to be to do with effectively trying out additional tyres for, or rather getting data from the existing LMP1 teams for the future. And my belief was that potentially was to kick in not for Sebring but for Spa and thereafter. There's two strands to this story. One is I genuinely don't know whether or not that's going to happen. I will catch up with some of the LMP1 teams before or during Sebring and Ask, and for that matter with Michelin and Ask. The other side to it is this, which is I am aware that there has been a proposal to one of the privateer LMP1 teams, in this case it is Rebellion, and that what that was suggesting was that the numbers being crunched within that program from the very high quality Orica technical team that handles the Rebellion program and crunches those numbers, that there was the opportunity by Le Mans this year to have an aero program, a bespoke tyre program with Michelin, and a Gibson engine program that all put together would have been no small number to effectively get the next iteration of the R13, let's call it the R13A, that would have required, I believe, 2 new cars for the Le Mans 24 Hours. Now, I have heard literally nothing that says that has been signed off and agreed that would happen. I do know that there was a team investigating whether or not there might be anybody interested in taking on the existing cars. The fact that we've not yet heard anything of the sort tends to indicate that probably isn't not going to happen, but it's a good indication of the kind of machinations that go on beneath the surface. That approach, by the way, was being made to the European Le Mans Series teams, not to the WEC teams. It was happening at Portimao, and it happened throughout that weekend. There were a number of people doing a number of things to try to see whether or not, my guess is, to see if they could basically get a cash flow going that might have helped to underwrite a development program for the Rebellion. Not aware that's going to happen. Whether or not we see a milder form of development, I don't know. So the answer is we don't yet know whether or not there's going to be development for the non-hybrid cars. I would like to think that there would be, because I think there's that opportunity. What do I expect? I expect that the existing non-hybrid LMP1s will be just that bit closer again, race by race. If we could get rid of the nonsense that is the differential fueling time, then I think what you might be able to see, if not wheel-to-wheel racing, is certainly some very rapid LMP1 cars indeed, giving the Totas, at least for open running, something to actually think about for a wee while. We've seen it, there's been flashes of it, their ability to actually produce a lap time. I do think if you're going to be trackside at the 12 Hours of Sebring, and for that matter, the Sebring 1,000 miles, I think you're going to see something special. I think you're going to see DPIs unleashed, which is great. I think you're going to see traditional non-hybrid LMP1s running extremely quickly. And I think you're going to see the likes of something that has not been seen at Sebring before on that fabulous piece of scarred and battered concrete, which is a couple of Toyotas absolutely let loose. So if you're coming, it's going to be a hell of a week for us to work at MP, but I wish I was going to be trackside.
Let's go to, hey, we're going to move away from Reddit for a moment here, coming back to the Riley Mark 30 world at Schwarzschick. Also, we have Bren Holtz Verlai, I believe. We got a bunch of names to possibly use. Here's the person who submitted it, and I apologize if I murdered those names, who asks, do you see any chance that a Riley Mark 30 LMP2 car races again, either in AsLMS, IMSA, Asian Le Mans, or even Le Mans? Or do we have to be satisfied by seeing its descendants in the DPI class in the form of Mazdas and maybe Ford's future DPIs?
I don't. I'll be honest with you. I think there is only one raceable car left. Didn't the one of the cars was destroyed, wasn't it, in the shunt? Was it Long Beach where that car got a big hit?
Boy, you are stretching my abilities to remember things properly.
But either way, I mean, I think there is one maximum two.
Yes, I believe so. That was the Spirit. Was it the Spirit?
Daytona car.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, that's right. So I think the one maximum two chassis in potentially raceable condition, no car has raced since Daytona last year. And as such, that means there's been absolutely no development. There is no data on those cars. And the reality, as MP and I've just been saying, with tyre development from Michelin and coming to from Dunlop, the reality is the game is moving on. And I suspect the next time we see one of those cars actually lap in any way competitively, it might well be in historic racing. That's very sad. It was good to actually have a little bit of variety for a little bit of time. But, I'm afraid what we've got now is, as you quite rightly said earlier on, MP, the cream in LMP2 is rising to the top. The numbers tell the story. Everything running at the moment in LMP2 in the USA is an Orica, with the Inter-Europol Ligier due to join for a couple of races. The majority of the 18 cars, I think it's 11 of the 18 cars in the European Le Mans Series, will be Oricas, 6. I think it's 11 Oricas, 6 Ligiers, 1 Dallara, and the vast majority of the, it's I think 5 out of the 7 full season cars in the WEC are Oricas. So I'm afraid that tells the tale. It is when it comes right down to it. You can have a favourite brand, you can like to see the variety, but ultimately if the stopwatch tells a different story, then at some point the person crunching the numbers to see whether or not you can get the guys in the car that are going to pay the bills is going to come to the same conclusion.
And I would just throw out, and I say this mostly seriously, with the nearby 25 hours of Thunder Hill becoming more of a pro-ish Pro-Am event each year, the fact that we have LMP3 cars now being used and whatnot, we've had Daytona prototypes used in the past. I gotta say, the X-Bar 1 Motorsports Mark 30, that was used last year at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Don't know who has it, don't know who bought it, but with that car being something that struggles in a straight line but makes phenomenal downforce and twisty bits, and owing to Thunderhill's mostly twisty bits composition, yeah, I'm just saying, I think you have a steady, ready winner of the 25 hours of Thunder Hill for anyone who would rock up in that hot rod. All right, so where are we going to go next for questions that interest you? Carlin moving into LMP2. This is something, and we try not to get into too much of the skullduggery and acrimony, but I do know that your young Jedi, Stephen Kilby, was hot on this trail a couple of months ago. December comes to mind, maybe, and I know had reached out to the team out of courtesy to say, hey, I hear you're going LMP2 racing, and was told flatly, nope, wrong, not happening. What are you talking about, crazy person? And I think being young, I'm not taking any digs at Stephen, I would have done the same thing. I think being young, still trying to establish his name in the sport, might not have been in a place where he felt like pushing back and saying, to heck with you, I'm going to run my story and I'm going to stand on it. He, I believe, tried to be a good citizen, building a relationship with folks that he didn't know before ringing them, and decided to sit on the story. And I know that he felt a little not so happy with finding out that A, he was right all along, and what he was told was not accurate. What he had learned was accurate. What he was told when he rang the team for comment was not. And turns out that he could have run the story a few months ago. So, I mean, that's the way this happens every day in every single racing series where, hey, I hear you're switching to a new driver. And they go, what are you talking about? That'll never happen. By the way, be here tomorrow morning at 8 for the press conference. But if you ride it, we're going to kill you, or whatever. So it happens all the time. I just felt bad for Stephen.
It does. I think, to explain, by the way, I think we said this before. They have the Dallara, the XSMP car, because their initially signed driver, Jack Manchester, is too tall for either the Orica or the Ligier. I would say this, oddly enough, Stephen's been with me in the office all day today, and this came up in conversation. He raised it in conversation. I think it's fair to say somebody at Carlin Motorsports at the LMS prologue test at Paul Ricard, is going to have a difficult 5 minutes with him because it's left him a little bit bruised, and I think he will be exercising his prerogative to protest at the standard quality and truthfulness of their response to what was a direct and very polite question. Let's wait and see. It is delightful to see them here. In the ELMS. Where might that take them? This is very early days indeed. I think we will know more some little while into this season. Do not at the moment go down the road of thinking it's Carlin, it's a big name, they're definitely going to go into P1. It's not like that. I think this is baby steps for them. They have a valued customer in Jack Manchester. They clearly are going to be putting together a program that satisfies him in LMP2, and I think this is them just seeing whether or not this is a direction that multidisciplinary team likes moving forward. It's a very sensible thing for them to be doing. It's what we've seen from a number of big single-seater teams that take a look into LMP racing, see whether or not they like the kind of temperature of that water. We saw it last year with Racing Engineering. They are stepping away. You will be hearing, I'm sure, very soon as to whether or not they are racing at all or whether or not they're racing in GT3 and with what, which is the change there. So that was a team that came in, had some success, and for whatever reason, the commercial side of things did not add up for them. It came down, I think, in their instance, to not being able to have a guarantee of a Le Mans 24-hour place and having lost a principal sponsor as a result of that. So those are the kind of things that come into it, not just being there. But yes, it is very good to have a new name to the ELMS and to LMP racing, and a big name at that in the paddock. And let's wait and see what they can produce for that Dallara chassis.
All right, let's go to, this comes in from @SafePhil, who asks, where can we find a hashtag Asian Le Mans spotter guide?
The moment there isn't one, it's a good call. What you can do, say Phil, hello Phil, is have a quick look at Daily Sports Car and our previous race coverage. I can't guarantee you it will fill all the spots, but if you have a look at Shanghai, Fuji and Buriram, and I think we did a finishing order gallery for each of those races, which means that the majority of the cars that are on the grid will be represented in that way. I am taking Pedro May out with me to Sepang. He's been with me all season out for the Asian Le Mans Series and thoroughly enjoying himself there. It'll be his first time at Sepang. And once we've basically dusted him off, given him a cold towel because it is going to be phenomenally warm there, I'll see whether or not we can't get something up on DSC before we get to race day.
We're going to keep ourselves rocking here in our WEC AsLM ACO category. Comes in from Adam Smith. Thank you, Adam, for always sending in great stuff. Says, okay, any updates on the Ferrari Hypercar Le Mans program? Are they hiring staff yet? Or will they use what they have for car development? That might be getting a little bit ahead of things, Graham?
Just a tad. Yeah, I think the debate at the moment about the hypercar, is whether or not they've got the numbers right. Let's see whether or not we are. I wouldn't quite yet have expected to hear a major project announcement from a big OEM quite yet. I would start to get worried if we've not got more positive noises coming by the time we get to Le Mans. But the current debate appears to be whether or not the numbers that were initially touted, and remember that was 20 million or so euros for a two-car full season program, whether or not they are remotely achievable. And one of the answers that I've heard is in the instance of Ferrari, they've determined that they're not. So I'm waiting fairly patiently for responses to a couple of questions from people who are in the know there. I've got my finger in all sorts of pies around other aspects to this story with a very large number of teams, manufacturers, interested parties, potential backers, people who've been in that. And I am beginning to draw together some of the pieces of this, but this is going to take some time to crystallize. So at the moment, I think we're going to have to be just a little bit patient. Remember, we haven't yet started the season before the season that these cars are due to race in for the first time. And remember, too, that in multiple occasions when we talked about this previously, we've already discussed that if this was to be as successful as I and others thought that it might be, that the vast majority of the high-profile teams are unlikely to be in year one either. So for my reckoning, the mark of success, I think, is going to come pretty quickly in terms of the kind of jungle drums that are playing. But if success does come, then you're looking at, I'm afraid, a bit of jam tomorrow, or rather tomorrow plus another 730 days more.
All right. We are, I don't want to say we're rounding the final corner at the end of our WEC-driven questions, but we're getting there. Let's go to another pal, Jordan Darwin, who writes in on Facebook and asks, there was something on a Facebook Penske group about the captain saying something to the effect of Le Mans, the only race left he would like to win, and then he tried to take over Audi's LMP1 program when it was folding. Do you ever hear Penske and Le Mans rumors in the sports car paddocks? Do you think Penske would only want an overall win versus a class win? And what programs do you think he would, should, could take to La Sarthe? And Jordan, yes, as someone who enjoys speaking with the captain on a semi-regular basis, you've touched on a lot of the standard points that he makes. Going there for a class win holds no interest. Also, going there as Penske Racing alone is not something he is interested in doing. It would need to be funded and on behalf of a manufacturer. Roger, although he does, in some instances, put in his own money into his racing teams when needed, by and large, Roger does nothing on a grand scale unless it is a business move with a partner. So, yes, something like continuing or getting a hold of and running the Audi LMP1 program. I mean, those are the kinds of inquiries that get made if that's possible. But yeah, I do know that, Roger's now in his 80s, I believe. Yes, there's a finite amount of time for RP to get an overall victory. I can't say that I have any insight as to, he's speaking with, could it be Acura/Honda about entering the hypercar space. I can't claim that there's a specific manufacturer that Roger is in detailed conversations with. I apologize. I'm trying to manage my cold here. Can't say that there are any detailed conversations I know of taking place for Roger to get to La Sarthe a couple years from now and play in this hypercar world. I'd also just say, Graham, to close here, I would be very surprised if there were zero conversations before too long. So none that I know of now, but I know in Roger, there are going to be conversations taking place somewhere at some point.
I'll add 2 or 3 bits of information. The first thing is, I believe the reason it was in that Facebook group, because I think he was asked on the live Daytona 500 show on TV about this, and that was the answer that the captain actually gave. Secondly, I can tell you there have certainly been conversations in the relatively recent past about that being a possibility. They came to naught. The only other thing I can actually add into the mix was a question I asked at a dinner at Le Mans last year with the very highest of high sources within the ACO and the FIWC about the conversations they were having with manufacturers at the early stages of the hypercar regulations and, where those conversations were going. And I did ask a specific question. Are you currently talking in terms of the prospect of any kind of early adoption for hypercar regulations to any of the manufacturers that are currently involved in DPI? And the answer was no. And of course, Acura, HPD/Honda are one of those manufacturers. That is, I think you're absolutely right, MP, the most likely of manufacturers that would be involved there. And certainly in the early part of this, like I say, Le Mans last year, the answer was no, that Honda were not an active part of that discussion.
All righty. Let's go to... here's one where we'll get into it, and this is a question from Scott IMSA about Ben Bowlby, what he's doing currently, and some of the recent projects. And we'll get into it as much as we can, Scott, with the knowledge that Ben's someone who has remained, at least from a media speaking publicly standpoint, Ben has done a pretty good job of sequestering himself since the GTR LM P1 program. And as someone, at least on this end, who's had a pretty long and solid relationship with him, you always, Graham, suffer the consequences of being honest in your analysis, reporting, or opinion-based things that you happen to write with those who you get on well with. There are some who we interview in the paddock, and it is just straight black and white, no relation, just a professional relationship. Hi, can you please tell me about ABC? They say 1, 2, 3, you write the story, done. There are others who you just have a more familiar, friendly relationship with, have things in common, and again, I think with Ben, my guess here is he's probably not been as motivated to speak with me because I was probably one of the folks who wrote more about the failings of the GTR LM project and the things he did wrong than most, not to be mean, but just to try and frame things as accurately as I saw them. So with all that said...
Reality, yep.
Yeah, Scott says, gents, I know you've both chatted about the two most recent Ben Bowlby cars, the Delta Wing and the Nismo GTR LM P1 projects. Do you have any idea what Bowlby is working on at the moment? I love the idea of the Delta Wing when it was proposed as a new Indy car. Also love the fact that it raced somewhat in both open and closed cockpit forms. However, what ultimately is its true legacy other than just a cool concept? And are there any other technologies from that concept still alive, migrating into other prototype design, any formulas? And I'll probably just stick there with the main topic of, do you know what Ben is working on at the moment, Graham?
I don't. I mean, oddly enough, I'm trying to remember whether I'm pretty certain bumped into, and in fact had a coffee with at Daytona with Darren Cox. Who was there doing some business to do with his kind of e-racing concerns.
Saw him as well.
Absolutely. Had a long chat with DC about a variety of things, and I'm pretty certain it was Darren who said he'd bumped into Ben, actually, I think at an airport lounge somewhere fairly recently. So no clue what Ben is working on. As for the legacy of that car, oddly enough, it came up for discussion just today. And it came up in discussion on a couple of fronts. One is, you're absolutely right. The kind of road car look of that front-engined car certainly was part of it. Did that have a bearing on hypercar? I don't think it did. I think it's kind of accident of fate. But the other part that certainly came forward to it, and I know it's an area that attracted a huge amount of criticism from the fan base, but actually I think a lot of that misplaced, was I've been to Le Mans professionally now for just under 2 decades every year. I cannot think of a single program at any level at Le Mans that was activated as effectively as that program was activated. What do I mean by that? If you're not familiar with that term, I mean that was being communicated to an audience wider than just the paddock, that actually was there trying to engage with people, to talk about the car, the concept, the technology, the brand, etc., etc., etc. Now that gets a pretty rough deal. Quite often it's seen as being the kind of softer end. The engineering end is the hard end, and the communication side of things is the softer end. But here's the deal. That's what's missing from sports car racing at very many levels. That's actually the gap between what we achieve in terms of reach and in terms of understanding and in terms of value, and where other formula actually score very highly. If you think I'm wrong, go and look at what's been going on with Formula E in the very recent past, and the money that is being spent on reaching out beyond the concrete canyons of the Formula E the Formula E paddock. Look as well at actually what the brands go and spend in things like Formula One. That's where the gap is. I'm not saying that's necessarily always an achievable gap, but doing a lot with relatively little, the Nissan team did badly in terms of engineering and in terms of raceability of the car, did fantastically well in terms of drawing a following for that car, to the extent that I think I genuinely think if you were to show people with a vague interest in race cars a debadged, decolored version of a number of LMP1 cars of the recent past, that you would find a surprisingly large number that would pick the Nissan as being a Nissan out of that lineup, despite the fact it only raced once.
Also, tack on to the end of this here, Graham, our friend Paul Ryan was a huge driver of the Nissan promotional strategies. All that team needed was a decent finish at Le Mans to validate all of the cool, fun, and very personable marketing initiatives that they unveiled. And,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, if they'd finished 10th in class, if they'd finished something where the car ran the entire time, it might not have been a leader, but at least it was vaguely acceptable. If that had just been achieved by one car, I think history would remember the program so much differently, because they went to such great efforts to have fun and make it feel like something and have personality there. I realize that most fans never saw it. It wasn't really a huge publicly accessible thing, but their little, call it dining media, whatever compound in the Le Mans paddock that had, that had an awesome, kind of funhouse stuff built onto the side of it where you could slide down and whatnot. It was just something where you could see, okay, they are realizing that, look, if you're in the market to buy a car, you are going to know the amount that you have. And so that's going to automatically qualify you or disqualify you for many of the models that are participating at Le Mans. Look, I don't have Porsche money, but I might have Toyota or Nissan money. Cool. Well, then what might I choose between the two of them? Again, if I'm totally wide open. And you have to look at, if you're just looking at things, you go, hey, I don't know that either brand super well, but one of them is giving me a feeling that they're either fun, that they're trying to do interesting things, just something that might form a bond beyond we won on the racetrack and we are good and we dominate. I mean, great, everybody sings that song, but I look at what they achieved with purely promotional, marketing-minded stuff, and it was amazing. And I just feel so bad in some of the decisions that were made well in advance that made it almost impossible for that mission to be achieved. So, yeah, pretty amazing, though. And then, but the the final point to all that, though, is because the cars were such catastrophes, I think, if anything, it actually destroyed so much of the good marketing and promotion work, because you then fall back to the inevitable, gotcha. You got time and money to spend on slides, 3-story slides to slide down and have fun here, but you couldn't spend that time or money to make the race car better or more competitive. The marketing and promotions were so good that the car's absolute failure really just helped folks to understand, like, whoa, priorities are way out of whack here. Go hard on the car and then come back in year 2 and have the super kind of fun. Don't seemingly over-provision and win in one area and then fail in the thing that's supposed to be your core competency. So anyways, just there's so many lessons that can be learned from this moving forward. So I'm hoping that papers are written about this and dissertations follow. Speaking of, let's get to our last two questions in the WC Asian Le Mans Series and ACO. This comes in from Steve Hamilton regarding Audi to Le Mans with a hydrogen car and a rumor there. Yep. Thanks also to our man Ryan Kish from Daily Sports Car, who is doing a great job of grabbing all the questions, organizing them, and even helping us with little lead-ins here. Steve says, did I hear something about Audi potentially looking into going back to Le Mans with hydrogen power, or did I dream that? Also, who ran the hydrogen-powered car demos at Spa last year?
Okay, can answer those one. I don't know whether you heard it because I'm not in your head, but I can certainly confirm that there has been some coverage on it.
Oddly, you're in mine. Get out there now.
But the answer is yes. Audi have made some noises about being potentially interested in this possible planned zero-emission formula from the middle of the next decade, 2024 or thereabouts. They're not the only ones. BMW have also made it clear that they might be interested there. Toyota, I've heard Porsche too. Again, this is actually spools all the way back. Do you remember that question about North American racing electrification? It is about new technologies pushing forward the lower emissions that are being becoming so much more now part of the narrative and the reality. And narrative and reality in one particular phase of development, and the way in which an industry communicates becomes customer demand next. And all you have to do to see whether or not that's true or false is go down to your local parking lots, pop along every line of the cars there and just see how many of those cars you actually probably don't realize are a hybrid are now hybrid. And the next thing that's coming, if the smart money's correct, is going to be hydrogen fuel cell, etc. And yes, you did hear that. As for which team ran the little Ades H24 car that displayed briefly at Spa in the AsLMS race, well, we wait to see whether or not that car will be on the entry. Effectively, it's an invitational entry, demonstration entry for the Michelin Le Mans Cup this year. That's what was promised as being a possibility, but it is a team that's been put together by the ACO to demonstrate that technology as part of the development process for the technology to come, and that they are very serious about. They're talking about incorporating the delivery mechanism for hydrogen into the new pit building that's due again at about that same kind of period of time, 2023, 24, 25. So they're deadly serious at this stage, tracking what's going on in terms of technology, tracking what's going on in terms of the affordability of that, and seeing whether or not that might form part of the next phase of the story.
Dun, dun, dun. And we have reached, not the penultimate, you just answered that one, the ultimate. The final question. This comes from Rob Chalmers, and this is just adding a point that we touched on earlier. Rob asks, will the Ben Keating Ford GT be in addition to the Ford Ganassi cars at Le Mans, or would it be one of the IMSA cars handed over early, that they're since they're not in the hunt for the WC points? I will admit that I'm a little bit lost in the latter portion of that, but I do know, Rob, that other than today's test, we're recording this on a Tuesday, at Sebring, where the Ganassi team is running that chassis for Ben and just running him and letting the drivers there of that entry get acclimated, it will indeed be handed over to Ben since he owns it. And Bill Riley Motorsports will be the team behind the official entry. The official entry has been awarded to Keating Motorsports, and as we have seen for many years now, Bill and his team, whether it's under the Riley Technologies, Riley Motorsports, Keating Motorsports banner, that is Ben running it. I know from how Ben explained it, and also Bill, again, keep in mind the two of them are on this week's edition of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, which I thoroughly recommend you go take a listen to, on some podcast by a guy named Marshall Pruitt. That guy's an idiot, but their stuff is really good this week. He did say that the way this worked from a comfort standpoint with Ford and Ganassi, knowing that they're going to be at Le Mans going for a final class victory in GTE Pro before this factory effort shuts down, it had to be something where Ben's GTE AM effort was not a drain. It wasn't something where Ganassi and Ford engineers are spending a lot of time over there helping to prop that up. So other than the, ECR handling engines and such, I'm sorry, Roush Yates, I apologize. Roush Yates handling engines and just some of the normal, this person plugging into the car of that person, it's going to be a Riley Motorsports run effort that does not draw from anything the Ganassi team or Ford's trying to do there for the 24 hours of Le Mans. So,
can I just add one point here, by the way, which is just a missing thing. We don't yet know, remember, whether or not there are going to be 4 Ganassi cars at Le Mans. That will only be confirmed or otherwise by March the 1st when we get those final. And I know there are certainly sources within the wider Ford Performance family that are concerned as to whether or not they will get all 4 cars in. Let's wait and see.
Interesting. Well, I'm also meant to speak with Ford Performance boss Mark Rushbrook here in about an hour and a half, so I'll ask him if they're going to be 4 cars.
Please do.
And then when he doesn't answer, I'll say, well, that wasn't unexpected, but I got to do it anyways. Let's, my friend, start to wind down, knowing that we are at our 1.5 hour self-imposed general rev limit, time limit here for the show. We have both the general category and fun left to get through, and there's actually a whole
bunch of those.
We've got a ton of questions here, so some of these might carry over to next week. As we mention every week, if we do not get to your question and you really want it to be addressed, please send it through. We've had it take as many as 4 times in the past, but we have gotten to them. So since we do want to keep this a little bit short, since Graham is A, very hungry, as we can tell, and B,
massively
needs to pack because he needs to get on a plane and throw his body clock into all kinds of panic, we're going to be very picky and choosy to wind down here. This is one I haven't seen. This one. Maybe I've heard about this raised as a topic, I don't know, once maybe, so I loved it when I heard it. This comes in, again, from our general questions category, and this is via James Fox, who says, all right, here we go, buckle in, Graham. General question, is race or match fixing an issue in sports car racing? I know that drug testing is a thing, but is it something that promoters or rule makers actively monitor? Crashgate, that being the reference to Nelson Piquet being instructed to crash his Renault Formula One car to benefit his teammate. Crashgate is the only motorsport example that comes to mind, but the thought occurs watching some crashes. What comes to mind in a sports car construct, Graham?
There's one, and there's going to be an opportunity for anybody out there to read about it, all be in a kind of slightly one level removed sense. And of all places, it happened, and it wasn't quite match fixing, but it was certainly spread betting. And it happened in the British GT Championship in the late 1990s. And my beloved friend and founding editor of Daily Sports Car, Malcolm Cracknell, in his retirement, has been cracking away and writing a semi-fictionalized version of exactly that tale. I'm not going to spoil it, because actually I'd like you to buy the book, because the book will be launched later this year. But it is an absolutely true story involving 2 top teams in the British GT Championship, both of whom were running full-blooded GT1 cars at the time. One a Porsche, one a V12 engined. How could we put this without actually giving the game away? Began with L and ended in Ista Storm. Those 2 teams involved in all sorts of shenanigans. It is a fantastic tale, and I'm just going to say this, we'll probably run aspects of that book on Daily Sports Car ahead of Malk actually taking the covers off the tale itself. But keep an eye on that one. It is a fascinating tale about the way in which the two organisations involved conducted themselves in late 90s and the hotbed that was the British GT Championship at that point. I'm sure there are others, MP, but that's the one that always springs to mind for me. It was at the time at which I was stepping into that cauldron, and the water was a bit hot at that point.
Well, in the interest of moving us forward a little bit, we will try and stick with your answer as the solo solution here. This one that's come in, I just love it. I just love it all kinds of ways because it's so us. This one comes in from Mike Hogg on Facebook. The real inquiries about World Challenge America GT3 field strength presented with this question. With the first round of the White Loaf, sponsorship opportunities available for every conceivable aspect as a part of Stefan Rattel's evil plan for World Domination Challenge Series, American branch, coming up in 10 days or so. Mike, you're brilliant. How's the GT3 field likely to look after a tough season last year? There do seem to have been a few announcements of a couple returning and even new teams this year. Yeah, Mike, I think you are reading things in a similar way that I happen to be. I mean, you've got, again, I can't say how many rounds all of these vehicles will be competing in, whether it's every or some, but just looking at looking at those who've declared plans to be there. We've got the 111 competition Ferrari 488 GT3, CrowdStrike Racing, Mercedes GT3. Wright Motorsports is going to be there with very heavy factory involvement with 911 GT3Rs.
K-Pax?
Yep, Allegra will be back with a Porsche. DXDT's there with a Mercedes. GMG with a Porsche. K-Pax with a couple of Bentleys. Racer's Edge, right? That's great. Stepping up. They've been in the lower categories in this. I can't even think of the acronym that Mike's come up, but we need to use. They've declared that they're going to be using an Acura, I believe. US Racetronics. They're stepping up, having been in the Lamborghini Super Trofeo series. They're meaning to do some running in a Mercedes GT3. So again, we're talking 12-ish, 12 or so, something in that range. I'd say not bad. Where I believe things are getting to be more interesting than not is a couple years ago, we were talking about, hey, this Sprint X thing that World Challenge is trying to grow, is it just, Graham, a fill-in, a quasi-endurance type thing? It's not a real endurance race, but a quasi-endurance thing where at least they can say, hey, we can have two drivers in a race that will help defray costs for the entry. We'll have, some refueling and tire. We'll have some pit stoppy type fun, even though it's not, fully hardcore necessary. But we'll do a facsimile of very short sprint racing in, quote, endurance racing structure. We'll see what kind of interest that attracts. And it has become the thing that I believe is now going to be World Challenge's defining type product across more or less every class. So just, I think as we move forward, it's great to see that there's still a GT/GT3 class where we're going to get to see these cars run in a kind of traditional World Challenge way. One driver, knock down, bang out, bang, kind of have fun, crash 'em up derby, which has always been fun. I don't say that in any kind of critical way. It's just, it's always been part of World Challenge's character, and I've loved it. I've competed in the series in a couple different times. But looking at GT entries, we're talking mostly on the short endurance race capacity than just the standalone GT angle. And also just looking at the number of rounds, Graham, there's downsizing and consolidation in general with the new Blancpain-owned, SRO-owned Blancpain badged World Challenge product. And I do think that, we are in 2019 with it becoming, there's full SROification taking place. By 2020, 2021, I think it's going to be pretty much a mirror image of what we see in Europe or abroad with what the SRO does. And we'll see how much appeal that holds for folks, knowing that if you want, longer form GT racing and GT3 spec cars, or even in GT4 and TCR, there's another option here in North America that's going to cost you more, but there's some real hardcore endurance racing available with more or less the same machines. So, not sure we're going to know, Graham, who's the quote winner in the marketplace this year. But I think we're only a year or two away from finding out really which one's going to thrive, because I don't see how two kind of coexist and produce half-hearted grids.
There's another interesting question, actually, that falls out from that, which is to do with the GT4 side, because, remember, SRO did not announce a GT4 series to fall out from the old Pirelli World Challenge branding. They announced three. They announced the GT4 aspect of the, if you like, the full season, but also GT4 West, GT4 East. On that front, then that remains to be seen whether or not that's going to be sustainable in year one. I will drop into DSC's output for tomorrow before I step onto the plane. I think what will be the final aspect of the catch-up I got with Stefan Rattel the end of last year, which we talked about, the approach to if you like, SROing the Pirelli World Challenge product into 2019, and he had some interesting things to say about that and about the drivers behind that in terms of why they've made the choices they've made. And I will say this, he was very clear that they laid out the options and then they took it to the customers. And in one particular case, the reason why you've actually got a split between the pure Sprint and the Sprint X is because that's exactly what the customers asked for. They wanted both. It was split down the middle. He's provided them with an opportunity to do exactly that, to do both. So it's an interesting aspect on that. I know that the way in which SRO tried to standardize their product jars with some. On occasion, it's absolutely jarred with me. I've had some extraordinarily, how can we put this, highly charged conversations with Stefan and some of his people down through the last couple of decades. But certainly in terms of the numbers that these guys are putting on grids worldwide, the reality is, more often than not, they've got it right. Not every time, but more often than not, they have got it right in terms of attracting cars to their series. At times, it's taken maybe a year or two to get that one absolutely right. But we'll be interested to see what we get in 2019 and then beyond that MP into 2020.
We've got two here to close general, and then we'll move in and grab a couple of fun and bid farewell. And just by chance, these tend to fall a little bit in our professional direction. So let's go with the one that came in from our man James Counters. Yes, I'm just pluralifying things. Who says, Graham, sorry MP, how do you and your co-writers, Stephen Kilby in particular, divvy up who contacts whom? I'm sure you have shared contacts, but also have different people who one or the other has a pretty good relationship with that person. How do you manage it? How much conscious effort goes into planning who investigates what? Keep up the great written and oral work, the both of you.
It's a really very good question. I would say this, increasingly, because during race meetings, I'm very often in a darkened room with Johnny Palmer, Martin Haven, Alan McNish, and Stephen is in the press room, that a lot more during some of those periods of time, the weight of expectation goes onto Stephen's shoulders. When you're away from the racetrack, you're right, absolutely right. We've both developed contact lists. There are some people that we both speak to. We do keep in very close contact on a multiple times daily basis. Stephen comes and works in the office with me, and will increasingly do that through this year, which makes it even easier to actually do that. But there's another aspect here, which is, make no mistake, I'm incredibly proud of how Stephen's career has developed. Young Writer of the Year just a few years back, that young man, lest we forget. And he is still learning. He's learning the tricks of the trade. He's learning the ways in which you get more for a little less effort, and how much more you can get by putting more effort into it. And that's an important part of pushing things forward. I will say this. I actually had to sit down with the aforementioned Malcolm Cracknell just before Christmas. We were chatting away about the state of the marketplace and podcasting. I was introducing him to the Marshall Pruitt podcast, which he's thoroughly enjoyed. And I'm sure he's listening to this.
Lies.
Evening, Malc.
Lies.
But he did remind me we're talking about me bemoaning the state of where it actually seems to be fastest finger first, the press release-o-matic, as someone actually once I thought geniusly described the internet marketplace for news. And he said, you just have to remember that actually there is just as big a marketplace out there for being best rather than just being first. And that's the if you like, that's the thought that we try to keep closest when actually you're frantically running to keep up with the flow of information that comes at you on certain days. And it is that thing around, do you want to be the person that posts up 3 or 4 paragraphs, maybe makes some errors and doesn't get the complete story just to grab the clicks? Or do you want to be the one that offers some kind of analysis, some kind of background, and completes that circle? And I think the answer is, if it were my choice, it would always be the latter. That's the way that I've tried to bring that young man through in his career. Long way to go yet. He's still thoroughly enjoying it, he tells me through gritted teeth as I loosen the shackles on the desk. But it is not as simple a process as perhaps it looks like. It is absolutely not waiting for someone to actually send you a press release, topping and tailing it and chucking it at the internet. It is a matter of actually trying to put some kind of insight, some kind of style, keeping away from the opinion if you possibly can, and presenting a clear picture to a waiting, listening or reading audience. And I hope we achieve that more often than we don't.
Oh, well, why don't we go to one more to close out General. This from our pal Jerry Sudduth, who says, last week you both lamented the fact that sports car racing is more and more an off-the-rack endeavor, and that cars crafted by teams are fast becoming a thing of the past. Do you see a point in the future where this trend gets reversed? What would it take to get it there? Thanks again, etc., etc. I'll take this one. Jerry, no, I hate to say it, but I don't. And one of the reasons why we've seen the prevalent shift towards manufacturer-produced, turnkey, off-the-shelf type race cars and formulas, championships that actually, say, look, it must be this specific thing conforming to this rule set instead of anyone come build it and come play, is because of the increase in technology in the vehicles. Electronics tend to be the thing that are cited most often. Hey, they're such high tech, they're spaceships, they're so advanced that it's becoming harder and harder for a person to buy that BMW 235 and bring it to their shop, strip the thing, remove all the sound deadening, and just do everything necessary, yank out all the unnecessary bits, and then make a proper race car out of it, because there are 47 different electronic items that need to speak with one another just to turn on the ignition or similar. Now, granted, having done this myself even somewhat recently, mid-2000s, latter 2000s, was the last time I did that, where we just yanked, it was in a Scion, a Toyota, yanked the entire wiring harness out of the car and replaced it with a 100% bespoke, very costly thing too. I'm still mildly scared by how much I paid for it, but to have a custom Motec loom, data system, and whatnot installed, it is more than possible to still do that. But I just think, it becomes awful easy, and it also becomes a trend, Jerry, where it, as I mentioned last week, if it happens long enough, people just become accustomed to, oh, hey, call this number, get a race car, done. It's here, no hassle, no cuts on your fingers, no major frustrations. Just spend a week or two prepping it to your liking, get it painted up nice and pretty and wrapped, and then off you go. I don't see how we come back from this. I think this might be a thing where it's lost. So I know that for those who like the older, more traditional dynamic of build it and it will be accepted, I think that's a part of our past. Unfortunately. Graham, I'm going to move us on to fun so I can move us towards the finale here. And this is also another one that just the first question happens to be in our hemisphere. This comes in from Sol Haimis, I believe. Mm-hmm. Apologies if I murdered that one as well. And the question is, personal question for you too. As I understand, you both worked other jobs in times gone by and only picked up the pen and keyboard later in your lives. What persuaded you to do it? To give up your time and later jobs to do this is a more serious matter. What do you ever have second thoughts? So tell us your story of coming into this world, Graham.
Well, okay. Well, first things first, I actually did train as a journalist before going into the great big grand old world of work. I trained as a journalist. There's a vocational course in the UK funded by the then newspaper industry, and indeed was trained under the auspices of moving to a local regional newspaper company. My timing was, however, disastrous. It was a time of great change in the newspaper industry with new technology coming on board, and the choice of my local newspaper organisation was pretty disastrous as well, because it was actually taken over by a guy who determined he was going to take on the then all-conquering, or the all-powerful rather, print unions. Cut long story short, that job was going to be cut from under me and everybody else, and I chose instead to go for my banker, professional banker, which was I went and joined the civil service, which sounds like the world's most tedious job. It was absolutely 20 years of absolutely fantastic fun, hugely hard work, but I worked for 20 years as as these things happen, increasingly senior member of the government communications corps in the UK, working in a huge range of areas, including for a couple of our prime ministers, including for a vast number of ministers and departments of state, working on such fun things as counter-terrorism, major kind of incident management with, for instance, the road safety campaigns that are very familiar to people in the UK, with seatbelt, anti-speeding and drink drive campaigns, transport, defence, you name it, vast number of things that were actually involved with that one. That then transferred into working elsewhere in the public sector, worked running communications across the fantastic city of London with things like the congestion charge and smart ticketing. Why did I make the change? Moved from London government to our national railway, hated it almost immediately, process ridden, I'm afraid, had 4 relatively unhappy years. That was coming to an end. I was coming to a kind of crossroads. I'd been commuting into London for 30 years. By this stage, I'd been working in motorsport in the background as a bit of a weekend and evening warrior for quite some time, and decided I'd had enough. And I would walk away from that, invest a bit of money into starting up my own business alongside Daily Sports Car, and that's what I decided to do. And as I've said, I've used this phrase before on the Week in Sports Cars, I have never earned less money across a year. And professionally, much as I work with some fantastic people doing some amazing things, Olympic Games, bids, Tour de France, you name it, been involved in all of that kind of stuff. I adore my job. It has its challenges. It has its up days and its down days. And, believe me when I say getting onto another plane is not glamorous, but I'm not stupid enough to think that that in any way compares with the working routines and rigors that very many people have to suffer in their day-to-day lives. But I am lucky to work with some truly fantastic people. But I'll say one thing here. There is a true hero at Daily Sports Car, and it ain't me, and it isn't Stephen, and it's not Dave Lord either. It's Mrs. Diaz, the editor, because without the wonderful Trudy Goodwin, who I'm watching at the moment, preparing my dinner in the kitchen because she's lovely, without her, I genuinely wouldn't have been able to put one foot in front of the other and make those choices. So it's to her that, frankly, this man owes his career.
Oh, well, that's pretty awesome. And similar owing, not to Trudy, though, but to my wife, Chevelle.
I thought that was a confession, wasn't it?
Oh, no. We've been meaning to have a conversation with you, Graham. I'll try and I'll be as succinct as I can here. For me, this is just a continuation of a life spent in motor racing. I did try and step away for a couple of years after the 2001 IndyCar season to lead a, quote, normal life, work a 9 to 5, worked in the biotech sector in the manufacturing division there. Interesting, put a lot of my racing background and engineering knowledge, mechanical knowledge to work there. But yeah, for the most part, since I was about 16 years old, I have worked in motor racing, and other than it was only about maybe 2 years, maybe 3, where I genuinely did nothing professionally in the sport. I mean, I did a little, don't get me wrong. I was still working, I guess I should rephrase that. Not working in a professional racing series. Pretty much right away got, I don't want to say bored, but realized that I just needed this racing component, and so was doing a lot of driver coaching and engineering, more on a local level, SCCA and NASA events and such. Even did a year as a race director for a local racing series, the American Racing Club. So that's something that I did. Did a lot of things in or around racing, and then just said, all right, going to get more serious about this. And during this kind of in-between phase of stepping out from being, my last posts working in IndyCar and related was kind of on the either race engineer, assistant engineer, team manager-ish type area after being a mechanic for a really long time, and data engineer. This in-between phase for me, kind of the early through the mid-2000s, Graham, it was just doing a lot of things. Got to a point where I was getting on a plane many weekends while working a normal job to fly out to World Challenge events, Pro Mazda events, open wheel stuff, sports cars, to be team manager / engineer. And so that was fun and kept me engaged, but it was also wearing me out. And then in around 2006, while doing that frequently in World Challenge, flying out, doing the team managing and engineering thing, recognized that while Speed, the Speed Channel, was the sponsor of the World Challenge Series, there was minimal coverage on their website, speed.com, and through a couple of friends, actually Eric Prill, who's now one of the senior folks at the SCCA, said, hey, this SCCA World Challenge Series of yours is awesome, but its primary sponsor isn't covering it much outside of its TV product. And so he connected me with the folks at Speed, and I said, hey, I'm going to be there at these races, and I don't really need any money because I'm already paid to be there, but can I help by writing something just to grow the profile of the series through your digital properties? And they said, hey, you are our favorite kind of reporter. Free! So they said yes, and honestly, that was really the big thing that helped get me launched in this new career. Beforehand and very quickly to close, my first published thing was 1994 in On Track magazine. Similar thing, I was at an event that was still somewhat remote, and it was my favorite magazine. They didn't have anybody there to cover it. I knew some folks who knew some folks. They said, hey, we'll give you $200 or $300 if you write a story. I did. And then pretty much right away, Graham, I think around 2002, when I was trying to do that 9 to 5 life, I still wanted to pick up this writing thing just because it was a curiosity, curious if I could do it, and ended up writing for a number of smaller magazines, import tuner magazines, modified luxury and exotics was another, and just got to know a lot of people. So they might not have been huge international print publications that we all know, but they were perfect for me, knowing that I could learn. It would entertain some folks, and in theory, if I really screwed up, not a lot of people would know about it. So did a fair amount of writing in print around that time, and then when the speed digital thing came to light, also at that time had a relationship with Car and Driver and Road and Track. They've been my longest standing client, so still work for them on a daily basis, weekly basis, etc. And then when Speed went away in 2013, my dear friends at Racer, who had started writing for the print version of Racer in 2012, said, hey, how about you do print and digital? And here we are. So that's the kind of weird wandering way that I got to where I am today. As for second thoughts, no. I have no interest in going back and running race cars, starting my own racing team. I would actually have interest in going back and doing select engineering on race weekends, because I do love that side. But the running, the managing of teams, I've done enough of that for a lifetime. And yeah, but no, I love what I do, and I'm struggling to think of a time where I won't. So telling stories about race cars and whatnot, yeah, that's my little happy place. Let's see. Let's pick one or two more here. I'm going to throw one at you from
Go for it.
Lynchpin, I believe, and I'm making that out of a Reddit name that is L1NCHP1N, who asks, what is the most outlandish rumor or conspiracy theory that you've heard which has turned out to be true?
Ooh, that's a brilliant question. Outlandish conspiracy theory that I found out later to be true. I think it's that astonishing revelation, and I never believed it, not for a minute, and it did prove to be true, that Gerard Neveu is French.
Poppycock. Balderdash.
Oh, by the way, if Gerard...
Belgian. Clearly he's Belgian.
If Gerard is listening, by the way, just imagine he almost certainly is after that. Just imagine at the moment, Gerard, I'm facing the wall at the moment. I'm putting my two extended fingers against my forehead, against the letter L, in reference to England versus France at rugby, his other beloved sports. And I'm afraid you're a great big loser there because we kicked your ass. But no, the conspiracy theories, cracker. It tends to focus around the end of something rather than the beginning of something. It tends to focus things like a fabulous piece of work that was done by press room colleague Marcus Schurig, unpicking the morass of rumour, internal machinations at Volkswagen Audi Group, and he predicted absolute pinpoint accuracy the end of the Audi LMP program. That was something which was almost unbelievable at the point at which he was first talking about it. But, the creeping realization that actually that was absolutely true was absolutely shocking, in the truest possible word. Conspiracy theories. Oh, I'm sure there's some crackers. I might have a think about that one and bring it back. But do you get to the stage where there's very little that surprises you? But whether or not it's actually what's going on track, we often do say in commentary, what goes on, literally anything can happen, and it often does, or it always does. There has barely been a race I've been involved with as a reporter or as a commentator that hasn't thrown up something truly surprising. But conspiracy theories, I'm going to take that one away and have a think about it, because I'm sure there have been some absolute corkers.
I'll throw this one in quickly. I've mentioned it before, but to me, it'll probably be king forever on this topic in terms of the most outlandish rumor that turned out to be true, and that was the alignment consolidation of Grand Am and the American Le Mans Series in 2012. So again, I apologize for those who've heard me tell this, and I'll try and keep it to 30 seconds or less, but we would get this almost on a yearly basis. Hey, we hear Grand Am's buying the American Le Mans Series. So I'd call the American Le Mans Series and speak to Scott Atherton, and he'd say, well, who says we're not buying them? Why does it always have to be us in the prone position? Maybe we're buying them, and there was never anything to it. And so when I had a friend from the paddock affiliated with a manufacturer who was very regularly in the know and told me lots of great things that were well ahead of them being publicly confirmed, said, hey, what have you heard about this ALMS and Grand Am coming together thing? And I said, I haven't heard it, but I hear it, at least a couple times a year, and it's always BS. And he said, yeah, mate, I wouldn't slow walk this one. I'd look into it, and did, and found out that he was spot on. And I almost pooped my pants when it was like, oh my gosh, this is the forever kind of white whale thing. Like, oh yeah, it's gonna oh sure it is. Oh yeah, no, I saw it. Yeah, sure you did. Oh, it's right over there. Sure it is. So many times, crying wolf had just become the norm. And so when it did actually turn out to be true, I thought I couldn't believe it. It's still hard to believe, even now, starting, year 6 of IMSA with this combined ALMS and Grand Am. So that was the one that just seemed like it was always going to be a crazy rumor and conspiracy theory, never realized. And when it did happen, yeah, one of the biggest, quote, scoops that I received. And, yeah, so that would be the one for me. Let's see. We got so many great fun questions. We're definitely going to want to carry some over to next week. I can answer this one quickly from Jason Gore, mentioning he's going to be going to his first Sebring, got his RV booked, etc. But the flight from the UK has everything booked, and asks, "Is there a book that the two of us would recommend?" Yes, it is written by the awesome Ken Breslauer, and I don't remember the exact title, but effectively type Sebring book and Ken Breslauer, Breslauer, into your preferred search engine, and you will find a massive, massive production that he has put out. It won't be inexpensive. It was printed a little while ago, and they are highly sought after. But if you want to know 99% about all things Sebring, that book is an absolute masterpiece to acquire. Why don't you pick one or two more funds, and let's say goodbye.
Well, I'm going to go for our good friend Right Turn Lover, who asked another question about
It
Sebring.
wouldn't be a Week in Sports Cars episode without a Right Turn Lover question.
It most certainly wouldn't, and neither it would be a Week in Sports Cars podcast without what were #you personally's most memorable Sebring 12-hour moments. I'm going to go first with that one, mate. There's been several. There was the 2002 12 Hours of Sebring. I think I'm right. That was the second ever live event that we covered on Daily Sports Car, and we suffered a terminal server failure back in the UK, which meant we couldn't post the website, and that happened 10 minutes into the race, and it is the only time I've had to walk away from race coverage because we were physically unable to actually post. But on the upside, it did mean that I actually got to go trackside at the Sebring 12 Hours for what I think was the first time. The other one, and it is a memory from back in the day when I shared the commentary booth one or two of the IMSA races at the 12 Hours of Sebring, and I was in this case not actually on the mic but actually calling, basically assisting with actually spotting at the end of the race for John Hindhoff, who was calling it for would be before the IMSA radio days, so it might well be the American Le Mans Series radio web days, and it was at the end of the race, and you remember it as soon as I say it, where the race for the overall was just about done, and I was noticing what was going on behind in what I think was still the GT2 class at that time, between a Ferrari and a Flying Lizards Porsche. And do I need to say more? I watched and gasped with the rest of you as that actually started to emerge and things got very heated indeed. And I vividly remember walking down the paddock at the end of that race to go and find either of the two proponents are there, finding a very pumped up Jörg Bergmeister who, through what can only be described as various kind of Anglo-German colloquialisms, described his feelings that, I think it was Jamie Malo, wasn't it, had, and I quote, tried to kill him.
Always fun when you have a German feeling like they have been attacked by a Brazilian, and stereotypes are just thrown out of the window, and the German is the one whose emotions are boiling over. Kind of a fine reminder that stereotypes are garbage.
Never dull, Sebring 12 Hours. Never dull that weekend at all. It is an extraordinary weekend. There's a big part of me that, for certain reasons, is not particularly looking forward to it as much as I perhaps might be. It's going to be one hell of a busy week indeed for us. But look, if you're coming along to watch trackside, you are going to have a ball. I think it's going to be one for the ages.
I'll throw in two. We have the first one. I might be one of the only people with footage of it, and that was 2008, I think it was. Yeah, turn one, early practice in the event. Might have been pre-race testing a couple days before. Whatever it was Marco Andretti going flat through turn one in his Andretti green Acura RX-01 LMP2 car. Just physics getting a double middle finger from young Marco Andretti. Oh, that was so amazing to watch. And I did get footage of it from behind, and it was just mind-blowing to see the amount of speed accelerating down that crazy long front straight, making that winding left-hand turn flat out, and knowing that not only were these cars ridiculously quick, beating LMP1 cars at many of the events that year, but using all that speed, but especially the wacky high levels of downforce and grip from those Michelins to hang on, and also knowing that with the track surface there being something that the blocks, as Jeff Brown told us this week on Inside the Sports Car Paddock, that they are often at varying heights, and so vehicular stability, not really something you get throughout turn one. And so watching Marco from behind, where I was filming this, go flying through flat out, the thing just four wheels flying off of an elevated block through the air, just that was nuts. I'd say maybe my most favorite hashtag me personally moment from Sebring from an emotional standpoint would have gone to 2011, and that being Hugh de Schoenack.
Oh, yes.
That being Oreca winning overall in a privateer Peugeot 908 FAP, HDI, HPI, DAF, you name it. The monstrous twin-turbo diesel V12 Peugeot 908. Watching them win as a privateer. Oh, I mean, come on. Seeing Hugh on the timing stand, that last lap, great photo. I think the awesome Regis Lefebvre has some, and others that we've seen, of tears streaming down Hugh's
Dave
face.
Lord. It was David Lord.
Okay.
It was David. Dave was actually. He decided he saw it actually emerging, what was likely to happen, and I'm pretty certain it was Dave had the presence of mind. He didn't have his cameras pointed at the track; he had his cameras pointed at the timing stand, and it's an awesome sequence of photographs from a joyful Hugh de Schoenack.
Flurry, tear. I mean, just again, sometimes. I'm trying to think how to say this in a proper way. Sometimes, for those of us who've been involved in motor racing and deep into motor racing for many, many years, there's still a passion, you love it, there's that thing that keeps you going, but like anything you've done for a long time, the newness of it wears off. You might not see or feel all of the sensations that you once did, just due to repetition, wears that down a little bit. So sometimes, when you can see fellow hardcore long-term racers like you, white-haired, and everybody on the timing stand there from Oreca, who've been doing this for decades, as long if not longer, and they're crying, and you see how much this victory means to them as privateers taking on bigger factories and such. Yeah, that's just what stands out to me. It was a moment where getting to see their emotion, how much it meant to them, just really, helped remind me of like, okay, man, this is why the sport is so amazing, because even for some of its most, long-term members, it can still evoke such reactions like this. So, I'll throw this out, man. We've got a lot of great questions to get to, but I think that might be our perfect closing question.
I think it's a cracker. I'll give my little bit of closing for the moment. We'll be with you later this week, I hope, with what we're planning is a bit of a special from the Sepang paddock from the AsLMS series. Thanks a million to all of you who sent in questions again this week. Thanks to Ryan Kish again for putting those together in such an orderly fashion for us. Please do resubmit for next week. We're going to have, they've not got much downtime up coming into March, but there'll be at least some time to actually do some justice to some of these general and fun. And maybe we'll start the show next week with those,
idea.
MP. So I know that one or two of you had a bit of a rough end of the stick in missing out a couple of weeks. And thanks again to you, Marshall Pruitt, for putting in the hours, particularly when you've been under the weather for the last week or so, for continuing to add to the pleasure of my enjoyment of the sport with the Marshall Pruitt podcast. I hope from a couple of conversations I've had today, we'll be introducing that to further new audiences. I'll tell you about that when we're off air, but all good stuff. We will speak to you next week. I've been Graham Goodwin. You've been Marshall Pruitt again.
Once more, and thank you to our dear friends at the Justice Brothers and Cooper Tires for making this possible. We'll speak to you next week.